"Open the safe and you can eat," orders the cruel stepmother. The hungry twins give in to the pressure and reveal the password. The instant the safe opens, the father walks in and witnesses everything. What he sees changes the family's destiny forever. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you will ever hear in your life. The rain hammered against the tall windows of the Whitmore estate, a sprawling mansion perched on the hills overlooking Seattle. Inside, the silence was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of an antique grandfather clock in the marble foyer. Two girls sat side by side on the velvet cushions of a window seat, their identical faces pressed against the cold glass, watching droplets race down the pane. They were 9 years old, mirror images of each other, with long chestnut hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. Their names were Charlotte and Scarlett Whitmore, and though they looked exactly alike, anyone who truly knew them could see the differences that lived beneath the surface. Charlotte, the elder by 7 minutes, was quiet and thoughtful. She spent her afternoons lost in books, creating entire worlds in her imagination where mothers never left and fathers always came home for dinner. Scarlett, on the other hand, was bold and fierce. She climbed the tallest trees in the garden, spoke her mind without hesitation, and had appointed herself Charlotte's protector from the moment they learned to walk. They were two halves of a whole, inseparable since the day their mother had been taken from them 3 years ago. The loss had left a wound that never quite healed, a hollow space in the center of their lives that no amount of expensive toys or private tutors could fill. Their father, Richard Whitmore, was a name that commanded respect in boardrooms across the country. He had built an empire from nothing, transforming a small tech startup into a multinational corporation worth billions. But success had come at a price. After his wife Eleanor passed away unexpectedly, Richard had retreated into his work, burying his grief beneath spreadsheets and conference calls. He left for the office before dawn and returned long after the girls were asleep. When he was home, he moved through the mansion like a ghost, his eyes distant, his mind elsewhere. The twins had learned not to expect much from him. A nod in the hallway, a distracted pat on the head, occasionally, a check signed for whatever the housekeeper said they needed. The mansion itself was a monument to wealth without warmth. Every room was immaculate, decorated by professionals who had never met the people who lived there. The girls had separate bedrooms, each larger than most apartments, filled with designer furniture and closets bursting with clothes they never chose. They attended the most exclusive private school in Seattle, where their classmates arrived in chauffeur-driven cars and spent weekends at ski resorts. But none of it mattered. What Charlotte and Scarlett wanted could not be bought. They wanted someone to ask about their day, someone to tuck them in at night, someone to notice when they were sad. Everything changed the day their father announced he was getting married again. The girls had been sitting at the long dining table, eating a dinner prepared by the chef and served by staff, who smiled politely but never stayed to talk. Richard had walked in, his phone still in his hand, and delivered the news as if he were announcing a business merger. Her name was Victoria Ashford, he said. She was sophisticated, elegant, and she would be moving in at the end of the month. He seemed to expect them to be happy. Charlotte and Scarlett had exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. They did not know how to feel. Part of them hoped that maybe, just maybe, this woman would bring warmth back into their cold, empty home. Another part of them felt a strange sense of betrayal, as if accepting a new person meant forgetting their mother. Victoria arrived on a crisp autumn morning, stepping out of a sleek black car with the poise of someone who had spent her entire life being admired. She was beautiful in a sharp, calculated way, with platinum blonde hair styled in perfect waves, flawless makeup, and clothes that whispered of luxury. She smiled at the girls, but the smile did not reach her eyes. Charlotte noticed immediately. Scarlett felt a knot form in her stomach. Still, they tried to be polite. They shook her hand when their father introduced them. They answered her questions about school. They showed her around the mansion, pointing out rooms they barely used. At first, Victoria seemed pleasant enough. She complimented the decor, praised the chef, and told Richard how lucky he was to have such beautiful daughters. But once the wedding was over and the last guest had left, something shifted. Victoria's mask began to slip. She started spending hours in her private sitting room, door locked, speaking in hushed tones on the phone. The girls would hear her pacing, her voice tight with frustration. They did not understand what she was saying, but they could feel the tension radiating through the walls. Then came the day Victoria began to play her game. It started subtly, so subtly that at first Charlotte thought she was imagining it. Victoria began to pay special attention to Scarlett. She would compliment her hair, telling her how shiny and beautiful it was. She would bring her small gifts, a bracelet here, a book there, always presented with a warm smile. She would sit beside Scarlett at dinner, asking about her day, laughing at her jokes, touching her shoulder in a gesture that seemed affectionate. Scarlett, starved for attention, began to soften. She started to believe that maybe Victoria did care. Maybe she was trying to be a mother to them. But with Charlotte, Victoria was different. She was cold, distant, her smiles thin and forced. When Charlotte spoke, Victoria would look past her, as if she were not there. When Charlotte asked a question, Victoria would answer in clipped, impatient tones. She would forget to include Charlotte in conversations, leaving her standing awkwardly to the side while she and Scarlett talked. She would criticize small things, the way Charlotte held her fork, the way she tied her shoes, the way she laughed too loudly. It was never anything overt, nothing that could be pointed to as outright cruelty, but it was enough to make Charlotte feel small, enough to make her wonder what she had done wrong. The twins, who had always been inseparable, began to drift apart. Scarlett felt guilty every time Victoria showed her kindness, knowing that Charlotte was being left out. But she also craved the attention, the feeling of being seen and valued. She told herself that maybe Charlotte was being too sensitive, that maybe she was imagining the coldness. Charlotte, meanwhile, withdrew into herself. She stopped trying to talk to Victoria. She stopped joining them at the table. She spent more and more time alone in her room, reading books and pretending she did not care. But she did care. She cared desperately. And the worst part was that she could feel the distance growing between her and Scarlett, the one person who had always understood her. Victoria watched it all with satisfaction. This was exactly what she wanted: divide and conquer, keep them off balance, keep them isolated. Because Victoria had a secret, one she guarded fiercely. She was drowning in debt, her expensive tastes, her addiction to online gambling, her inability to say no to luxury. It had all caught up with her. She owed money to people who did not forgive debts, people who had started making threats. She had married Richard Whitmore for one reason: to access his fortune. But Richard was careful with his money. He gave her an allowance, generous by most standards, but nowhere near enough to cover what she owed. She needed more. She needed the kind of money that was locked away, protected, untouchable. She needed what was in the safe. Victoria had discovered the safe by accident, hidden behind a painting in Richard's study. She had tried every combination she could think of: birthdays, anniversaries, random numbers, but nothing worked. Then one evening, she had been walking past the study and seen Richard inside, the safe open, his back to the door, and standing beside him, watching intently, was Scarlett. The girl had been asking him something, and Richard, distracted, had entered the code without thinking. Victoria's heart had raced. Scarlett had seen it. Scarlett knew the code. All Victoria had to do was get the girl to open it for her. But Scarlett was not stupid. She would not open the safe just because Victoria asked. Victoria needed leverage. She needed something that would force the girl's hand. And then, one night, the opportunity presented itself. Richard had left for a business trip, one of his frequent absences that stretched for days. The housekeeper had the evening off. The chef had prepared meals in advance and left them in the refrigerator. Victoria saw her chance. She took the containers of food and hid them. Then she cooked a batch of fried chicken, filling the house with the rich, savory aroma. The girls, who had been upstairs doing homework, came down immediately, drawn by the smell. They were always hungry. The chef's portions were small and elegant, designed for adults, not growing children. Charlotte and Scarlett appeared in the kitchen doorway, hope lighting up their faces. Victoria smiled at them. A cold, cruel smile. She picked up the platter of chicken and walked slowly to the trash can. Then, maintaining eye contact with the girls, she dumped the entire thing into the garbage. The twins stared in shock, their stomachs growling, their eyes wide with disbelief. Scarlett found her voice first. "Why would you do that?" she whispered. Victoria shrugged. "Because I can," she said simply. "If you want to eat, you will do something for me first." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling. Victoria's smile widened. "I want you to open your father's safe." The girls looked at each other, panic rising in their chests. "We cannot do that," Scarlett said. "That is private. Daddy would be so angry." Victoria leaned against the counter, examining her nails. "Then I suppose you will go hungry," she said. "There is no other food in the house. I made sure of that. You can wait until your father comes home in 3 days, or you can do what I ask. The choice is yours." Charlotte's stomach twisted with hunger and fear. They had not eaten since lunch, and that had been hours ago. 3 days without food. She could not imagine it. Scarlett's jaw tightened. She wanted to refuse, to stand up to this woman who had wormed her way into their lives. But she could see the desperation in Charlotte's eyes, and she knew her sister would not last 3 days. "Fine," Scarlett said, her voice hard. "I will do it. But you have to give us food first." Victoria laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "No," she said. "You open the safe first. Then you eat." Scarlett felt Charlotte's hand slip into hers, squeezing tight. Together, they followed Victoria down the hallway to their father's study. The room smelled of leather and old books, a place that had always felt forbidden. Victoria pulled the painting aside, revealing the safe. "Go on," she said, stepping back. Scarlett approached slowly, her heart pounding. She tried to remember the numbers she had seen her father enter. It had been weeks ago. She had not been paying close attention. She closed her eyes, picturing the moment. His hand moving across the keypad, the soft beep of each button. Slowly, haltingly, she began to enter the code. The safe clicked open. Victoria's eyes gleamed with triumph. She pushed past Scarlett, reaching inside and pulling out stacks of cash, jewelry boxes, documents. The girl stood frozen, watching as she stuffed everything into a bag. And then Charlotte saw something else. Tucked in the back of the safe, beneath the valuables, were drawings. Crayon drawings on construction paper, the kind they had made in kindergarten. Pictures of stick-figure families, hearts, flowers, their names scrawled in uneven letters. Charlotte's breath caught. She had thought their father threw those away, but he had kept them. He had kept them in the safest place he knew. And there was something else. An envelope, yellowed with age. With handwriting Charlotte recognized instantly. It was their mother's. With trembling hands, she reached past Victoria and pulled it out. Victoria did not notice, too busy counting money. Charlotte opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. Scarlett leaned in, reading over her shoulder. The words were written in their mother's graceful script, dated just days before she passed. "My dearest Richard," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and I need you to hear me one last time. Please do not let grief consume you. Please do not forget that our daughters need you. They need your love, your presence, your attention. Do not let them grow up feeling alone. Promise me you will be there for them. Promise me you will show them every day how much they are loved. They are our greatest gift. Do not let them forget that." Tears streamed down Charlotte's face. Scarlett's hands were shaking. Their mother had known. She had known their father would struggle. She had tried to protect them. Even from beyond. Victoria finally noticed the letter and snatched it from Charlotte's hands. "What is this?" she snapped. Charlotte lunged for it, but Victoria held it out of reach. "Give it back," Charlotte cried. "That is ours. That is from our mother." Victoria's face twisted with irritation. She shoved Charlotte hard, and the girl stumbled, falling against the desk. Pain shot through her arm, but she barely felt it. All she could think about was the letter. The last words her mother had written, now crumpled in Victoria's fist. Scarlett's protective instincts roared to life. She threw herself at Victoria, grabbing for the letter. Victoria pushed her away, and Scarlett fell beside her sister. The two girls sat on the floor, bruised and crying, while Victoria continued to ransack the safe. When she was satisfied, she turned to leave, then paused. "Oh," she said, as if just remembering. "You wanted food, did you not?" She walked back to the kitchen, the girls trailing behind her. Victoria opened the trash can and pointed. "There is your chicken," she said. "Help yourselves." Then she walked away, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Charlotte and Scarlett stared at the garbage can. The chicken sat on top, covered in coffee grounds and scraps. Charlotte's stomach churned with hunger and humiliation. Scarlett knelt down, reaching into the trash. She pulled out a piece of chicken, wiped it on her shirt and handed it to Charlotte. Then she took a piece for herself. They sat on the kitchen floor, eating cold, dirty food, tears running down their faces. But as they ate, something shifted. Scarlett reached out and took Charlotte's hand. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry I let her come between us." Charlotte squeezed back. "It is not your fault," she said. "We have each other. That is all that matters." And in that moment, sitting on the floor of their cold and empty mansion, the twins found their way back to each other. The bond that Victoria had tried so hard to break was stronger than ever. They did not know what would happen next, but they knew they would face it together. Richard Whitmore's flight landed 2 days early. The business deal he had flown across the country to finalize had fallen through at the last minute, a rare failure that left him frustrated and exhausted. He had considered staying in New York anyway, filling the empty days with meetings and dinners, anything to avoid the hollow silence of his home. But something had pulled him back, a feeling he could not name, a whisper of unease that had been growing louder with each passing hour. He had tried to call the house several times, but no one answered. The housekeeper's phone went straight to voicemail. Even Victoria, who usually picked up on the first ring, had not responded to his messages. By the time his car pulled up to the mansion, it was well past midnight, and the unease had transformed into something closer to dread. The house was dark, except for a single light glowing in his study. Richard frowned. He never left lights on. He paid the driver and walked up the stone steps, his key already in his hand. The front door was unlocked. Another anomaly. He stepped inside, and the silence hit him like a physical force. It was not the usual quiet of a sleeping household. It was something heavier, something wrong. He set down his briefcase and moved through the foyer, his footsteps echoing on the marble. As he approached the study, he heard voices. Victoria's voice, sharp and agitated, and then, softer, the sound of crying. His daughter's. Richard pushed open the door. The scene before him made his blood run cold. Victoria stood by the open safe, a bag stuffed with cash and jewelry at her feet. Charlotte and Scarlett sat huddled together on the floor near the desk, their faces streaked with tears, their clothes dirty and disheveled. Charlotte was cradling her arm, and Richard could see a bruise forming on her pale skin. Scarlett's eyes were red and swollen, her expression a mixture of fear and defiance. For a moment, no one moved. Then Victoria spun around, her face going white. "Richard," she stammered, "you are home early. I can explain." But Richard was not looking at her. He was looking at his daughters, really looking at them for the first time in months. They looked thin, fragile, terrified. "What is going on here?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. Victoria opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Scarlett stood up. She took a shaky breath and said, "She made us open the safe. She said we could not eat unless we did. She threw food in the trash and made us," her voice broke, "made us take it out to eat. She hurt Charlotte. She has been hurting us for weeks." Richard felt something crack inside him. He looked at Victoria, and for the first time, he saw her clearly. Not the polished, elegant woman he had married, but the stranger who had invaded his home and terrorized his children. "Get out," he said quietly. Victoria's eyes widened. "Richard, please, let me explain. I was desperate. I owe money. I need it. I said get out," Richard repeated, his voice rising. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Victoria's face went from pale to panicked. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Calling the police," Richard said. "You extorted my children. You assaulted them. You stole from me. You are going to face the consequences." Victoria lunged for the bag of money, but Richard was faster. He grabbed her wrist, holding her in place. "Do not make this worse," he said. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the night air. 2 police officers arrived, and Richard explained the situation in clipped, controlled sentences. He showed them the open safe, the bag of stolen items, his daughter's tear-stained faces. Victoria tried to argue, tried to twist the story, claiming the girls were lying, that Richard was overreacting, that she had done nothing wrong, but her desperation only made her look more guilty. The officers asked if there was any evidence, and Richard remembered the security cameras. He had installed them throughout the house years ago after a break-in scare. He had forgotten about them, rarely checking the footage, but they were always recording. He led the officers to his computer and pulled up the security system. It took only minutes to find the footage from earlier that evening. The video showed everything. Victoria cooking the chicken, the girls coming downstairs, hopeful and hungry. Victoria dumping the food in the trash, her face cold and cruel. The girls begging, Victoria forcing them to the study. Scarlett opening the safe, her hands shaking. Victoria shoving Charlotte, the girl falling and crying out in pain. The officers watched in grim silence. When the video ended, one of them turned to Victoria. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for child endangerment, theft, and assault." Victoria's composure shattered. She screamed, she cried, she begged Richard to stop this, to think about his reputation, to remember that she was his wife. But Richard felt nothing but disgust. "Take her," he said. As the officers led Victoria away in handcuffs, her shouts echoing through the mansion, Richard turned to his daughters. They were still sitting on the floor, watching the scene unfold with wide, disbelieving eyes. Richard knelt down in front of them, and for the first time in 3 years, he let himself feel the full weight of his grief and his guilt. "I am so sorry," he whispered. "I am so sorry. I failed you. I was supposed to protect you, and I let this happen. I let her hurt you. I was not here. I have not been here, and I am sorry." Charlotte and Scarlett stared at him, and then, slowly, they moved toward him. Charlotte wrapped her arms around his neck, and Scarlett pressed her face against his shoulder. Richard held them tight, feeling their small bodies shake with sobs. He cried too, tears he had been holding back for years finally breaking free. They stayed like that for a long time, the 3 of them clinging to each other in the wreckage of their broken home. When they finally pulled apart, Richard looked at his daughters and said, "Things are going to change. I promise you. I am going to be here. I am going to be the father you deserve. No more running away. No more hiding. We are going to be a family again." The next morning, Richard did not go to the office. He called his assistant and cleared his schedule for the week. Then he went to the kitchen and, for the first time in years, he cooked breakfast. It was nothing fancy. Scrambled eggs and toast, slightly burned around the edges. But when he set the plates in front of Charlotte and Scarlett, they looked at him like he had given them the world. They ate slowly, savoring every bite, and Richard sat with them, asking about school, about their friends, about the books they were reading. He listened, really listened, and he realized how much he had missed, how many moments he had let slip away. After breakfast, Richard suggested they visit their mother's resting place. The girls had not been there in over a year. Richard had avoided it, unable to face the pain. But now, he knew it was time. They drove together to the cemetery, a peaceful place on the outskirts of Seattle, surrounded by tall trees and rolling hills. Eleanor's headstone was simple, elegant, engraved with her name and the dates that marked her too short life. Richard knelt down and placed a bouquet of white roses on the ground. Charlotte and Scarlett stood on either side of him, holding hands. Richard pulled the letter from his pocket, the one Eleanor had written, the one Victoria had crumpled and tried to take. He had smoothed it out, folded it carefully. He read it aloud, his voice breaking on certain words. When he finished, he looked at his daughters and said, "Your mother was right. I let grief blind me. I forgot what mattered most. But I am not going to forget anymore. I am going to keep this promise. I am going to be here for you, every day." Charlotte wiped her eyes and said, "We miss her so much." Richard nodded. "I do too," he said. "But she is still with us. In you. In the way you take care of each other. In the way you are strong and kind and brave. She would be so proud of you." They stayed at the cemetery for a while, talking about memories, sharing stories, laughing through their tears. When they finally left, Richard felt lighter, as if a weight he had been carrying for years had finally been lifted. On the drive home, Scarlett asked, "What happens now?" "Daddy." Richard glanced at her in the rearview mirror and smiled. "Now," he said, we start over. We figure out how to be a family again. And we do it together." The days that followed were different. Richard worked from home, setting up an office in a smaller room so he could be close to the girls. He helped them with their homework, listened to their problems, tucked them in at night. He learned their favorite foods, their favorite colors, the names of their stuffed animals. He started a tradition of cooking dinner together every evening. The three of them working side by side in the kitchen, laughing at their mistakes, celebrating their successes. The mansion, once cold and silent, began to fill with warmth and noise. The girls hung their drawings on the refrigerator. Richard framed some of their artwork and put it on the walls. They played board games in the living room, watched movies curled up on the couch, and talked late into the night about everything and nothing. Charlotte and Scarlett began to heal. The fear in their eyes faded, replaced by trust and hope. They laughed more, smiled more, leaned into their father's hugs without hesitation. Richard saw the change in them, and it filled him with a fierce determination to never let them down again. He attended their school events, cheered at their soccer games, read them bedtime stories. He became the father they had always needed, the father Eleanor had begged him to be. One evening, as they sat together at the dinner table, Scarlett looked at her father and said, "Daddy, do you think Mommy would be happy with us now?" Richard reached across the table and took her hand. "I think," he said, "she would be very happy, because we are together, and we love each other, and that is all she ever wanted." Charlotte smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her whole face. "I think so too," she said. The mansion was no longer a monument to wealth and loneliness. It was a home, a place where laughter echoed through the halls, where drawings covered the walls, where three people who had been lost in grief and pain had found their way back to each other. Richard knew there would be hard days ahead. Healing was not a straight line, but he also knew that as long as they had each other, they would be okay. They would more than okay. They would be a family. And so, in the heart of Seattle, in a mansion that had once been filled with silence and sorrow, a new story began. A story of second chances, of forgiveness, of love that had been buried but never truly lost. Richard, Charlotte, and Scarlett Whitmore had been broken, but they were putting themselves back together, one meal, one conversation, one hug at a time. The road ahead was uncertain, but they would walk it together, and that made all the difference.